Hey everyone, this is Karenology. Buckle up because this story is absolutely outrageous. I stepped outside with my morning coffee, ready to enjoy a quiet Saturday, when I saw it. Dead patches of grass, scattered like scars across my once perfect lawn. My heart dropped. This wasn't some disease or natural disaster. This was intentional. Someone had done this on purpose. I set my cup down on the porch railing, staring at the destruction. My lawn was my pride, something I had worked on meticulously since moving into this neighborhood a year ago. Every blade of grass had been cared for, watered, trimmed, and nourished. And now, someone had poisoned it. I glanced over at my neighbor's yard, green, lush, and almost obnoxiously pristine. Mike, my 52-year-old next-door nuisance, was out there watering his grass, whistling like he hadn't a care in the world. My stomach churned. I knew he had something to do with this. He had been obsessed with having the best lawn on the block ever since I moved in, and for months it had been a silent competition. But this was low, even for him. "Morning, Frank," Mike called out, setting his hose down. He had that smug, self-satisfied smirk he always wore when he thought he had won something. "Tough luck with your lawn, huh? Guess you must have used the wrong fertilizer." I clenched my jaw. There was no way this was a coincidence. "Yeah, tough luck," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Funny how it just happened overnight." Mike shrugged. "Nature's unpredictable." I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me angry. Not yet. Instead, I walked over to the dead spots and crouched down. The grass wasn't just yellowed. It was completely bleached, brittle to the touch. My gut told me exactly what had happened, but I needed proof. I spent the rest of the morning installing a security camera under my porch roof, angling it toward the lawn. If Mike had done this once, I had no doubt he'd do it again. And when he did, I'd be ready. That night, I barely slept, waiting for the motion alert from my phone. At exactly 2:47 a.m., it buzzed. My heart pounded as I opened the app and watched in real time. There, under the dim glow of a street lamp, was Mike. He was dressed in dark clothes, crouched over my lawn with a plastic container in his hands. He poured a liquid onto the grass before shuffling back toward his yard. "Got you." The next morning, I downloaded the footage and debated my next move. Confronting him outright wouldn't work. He'd deny it. The cops? I doubted they'd care about some poisoned grass. No. If I was going to get back at Mike, I had to be smart about it. I did some digging, and it didn't take long to find something interesting. Mike had an online side hustle. He sold custom lawn care products under the table, claiming they were organic and chemical-free. I scrolled through his website, reading all his ridiculous claims. People actually paid for this junk? That gave me an idea. Over the next few days, I spread the word through the neighborhood. "Hey, have you heard about Mike's new lawn products?" I'd say at the grocery store, at the post office, even at the local diner. I made sure to phrase it just right. Never an outright accusation, but enough to plant doubt. "I heard someone's lawn got ruined recently. Wonder if it's connected." The more people whispered, the more his so-called business started to look suspicious. But I wasn't done yet. I sent an anonymous tip to the local environmental agency, claiming Mike might be using illegal chemicals. I knew they wouldn't ignore that. Sure enough, a week later, an inspector showed up at Mike's house. I watched from my porch as he stammered through the questions, his face turning redder by the second. The moment they asked to test his products, I knew he was done for. That night, Mike stormed over to my yard, his fists clenched. "You think you're funny, Frank?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Funny how?" He exhaled sharply. "I know you had something to do with this." "You think you're so smart, don't you?" I shrugged. "I just take care of my lawn. Maybe you should focus on yours." His face twisted with rage, but he had no proof. He turned on his heel and stomped back to his house. I knew this wasn't over, but I was just getting started. The first sign that Mike wasn't going to let this go came 2 nights later. I woke up to a loud rustling outside my window. Peeking through the blinds, I saw a shadowy figure crouching near my mailbox. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, but before I could do anything, the figure darted back toward Mike's house. I crept outside, flashlight in hand, and found my mailbox open. Inside was a crumpled note scrawled in red ink. "Back off, Frank." I chuckled. Really? That was his move? Threats? I took a photo of the note and tucked it into my pocket. If he thought intimidation would work, he had another thing coming. The next morning, I casually mentioned to a few neighbors that someone had been creeping around at night. "Might be a prowler," I said, watching their faces. "Better check your security cameras." The way their eyes widened told me they'd be on high alert now. If Mike wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure the whole neighborhood was watching. That same afternoon, I caught Mike standing by the property line, arms crossed, staring at my lawn. His expression was a mix of frustration and something else. Something desperate. "Nice lawn," he muttered. "It was," I shot back, "before someone decided to turn it into a science experiment." His jaw tightened. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not," I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice. "But what do you think happens when enough people start wondering? When your customers hear about this little accident?" His eyes flickered. I could see the calculation in his head, the wheels turning. "You're making a mistake, Frank." "No, Mike, you did. And you're about to see what happens when you mess with the wrong lawn." Over the next few days, things got even stranger. My trash cans were knocked over every morning. My garden hose mysteriously disappeared. Someone even smeared what smelled like fish guts on my porch. All petty, all obvious, and all pointing back to one person. But I never confronted him. No, I had a better idea. I did some research and found out that Mike had been bending the rules in more ways than one. A quick background check revealed he had been fined before for selling unregulated lawn treatments. Even better? His business wasn't legally registered. That was all I needed. I made a few calls. First, to the local Small Business Bureau. Then, to the Environmental Protection Agency. And just for good measure, I left an anonymous tip to the local news station about a man potentially endangering the environment with illegal lawn chemicals. The wheels were in motion now, and all I had to do was wait. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. A government vehicle pulled up in front of Mike's house, followed by a local news van. I stood on my porch, pretending to water what remained of my lawn, watching as 2 inspectors knocked on his door. Mike answered, and within minutes, his face turned a shade of red I didn't even know was possible. He argued, he waved his arms, but when they handed him a citation and started collecting samples from his yard, I knew the game was up. The next morning, Mike's wife, Jenny, came over. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "Frank, can we talk?" I set down my coffee. "Sure," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, I know Mike's been an ass. He's obsessed with this stupid lawn war. But whatever you're doing, can you just stop? It's ruining us." For a split second, I almost felt bad. Almost. "Jenny, he ruined my lawn. He harassed me. He's been pulling these little stunts night after night. And you're asking me to back off?" She looked away. "He's losing customers. People are canceling orders. If this keeps up, we'll have to move." I stared at her. Then maybe he should have thought about that before he poured bleach on my lawn. She didn't argue, just sighed and walked away. And for the first time, I saw what I had turned this into. Not just a petty feud between neighbors, but a full-blown war that was now affecting his entire life. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he deserved. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. My heart leaped into my throat as I grabbed my phone and rushed to the front door. A brick lay on my porch, surrounded by shards of broken glass from my porch light. My hands clenched into fists as I scanned the darkness beyond my yard. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly who had done this. Mike had officially crossed the line. I took a picture of the damage, then checked my security footage. Sure enough, there he was. Hood up, moving fast, chucking the brick before darting back toward his house. This wasn't just petty vandalism anymore. This was an escalation, and I wasn't about to let it slide. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went straight to the police station. I sat down with an officer, showed him the footage, and filed a report. "We'll talk to him," the officer said, but I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously. Just a couple of feuding neighbors, nothing worth real attention. That was fine. I didn't need the cops. I had my own way of handling things. That afternoon, I went to the local newspaper. I knew a guy there, Charlie, an old friend from my reporting days. I told him everything, showed him the footage, laid out the whole ridiculous saga. His eyes lit up. "This is gold," he said, grinning. "People eat up this kind of suburban drama. You sure you want to go public?" I nodded. "If the cops won't do anything, I'll make sure everyone knows who they're dealing with." The article went live the next day. Local man accused of targeting neighbor's lawn in bizarre feud. It had everything: screenshots, quotes, a summary of the environmental investigation into Mike's illegal lawn products. By noon, it was spreading like wildfire. People started talking. Whispers turned into outright conversations. The neighborhood Facebook page exploded. Then the TV crew showed up. A reporter knocked on my door, microphone in hand. "Mr. Blake, would you be willing to share your side of the story?" I didn't hesitate. I told them everything. And by that evening, it was all over the local news. Mike's face flashed across the screen, a quick clip of him slamming his front door in the reporter's face. The fallout was immediate. Customers dropped him like a bad habit. His organic lawn business crumbled overnight. The environmental agency announced they were pursuing formal charges. And best of all, the police suddenly took an interest. I got a call the next morning. "We're looking into it," the officer said. I could hear the shift in his tone. Now that the whole town was watching, they had to actually do their jobs. But Mike wasn't done yet. That night, I heard another noise outside. Not breaking glass this time, just a quiet, deliberate scratching. I flipped on my security monitor and saw him crouched near my lawn with another jug in his hands. He was doubling down, even after everything. I didn't even hesitate. I dialed 911. By the time the cops arrived, he was still there, mid-pour. The officers caught him red-handed. He tried to argue, tried to play the victim, but they weren't buying it. The footage, the article, the neighborhood uproar, it all came crashing down on him at once. I watched from my porch as they cuffed him. He locked eyes with me, pure hatred burning in his gaze. "You ruined my life," he spat. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You did that all on your own, Mike." The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People stopped me on the sidewalk, shaking their heads. "Can you believe he actually got arrested? What an idiot. Guess he won't be touching anyone's lawn again." Jenny, Mike's wife, was gone by noon. Packed up, drove away, no goodbyes. And by the end of the week, there was a "for sale" sign in front of their house. The war was over. And my lawn? My lawn was already starting to recover. Funny how karma works. The first few days after Mike's arrest were eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something is brewing beneath the surface. No more trash scattered on my lawn. No more late-night noises outside my window. Just an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. On the third night, I woke up to a strange glow flickering outside. My stomach dropped as I pulled back the curtain. Flames. Not massive, but enough to set the edge of my wooden fence on fire. I bolted outside, grabbing the hose, my mind racing. Had Mike been released already? Was this his final act of desperation? As I doused the flames, my security camera notification buzzed. I didn't check it immediately. My priority was making sure the fire didn't spread. By the time I went back inside, my hands shaking, I opened the footage and felt my blood run cold. It wasn't Mike. It was someone else. The figure was tall, lean, moving with purpose. The fire wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. I rewound the footage, watching again. The person had approached from the far side of my property, away from the streetlights. They crouched, poured something along the fence line, and lit a match before slipping back into the darkness. No hesitation, no second thoughts. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a message. I spent the next morning making calls. First, the police. Then, my insurance. Then, Charlie at the newspaper. By noon, half the neighborhood knew about the attempted arson. I could see the growing unease in their faces. This had gone beyond a feud between two neighbors. Someone else was involved, and nobody knew why. Then the letters started appearing. The first one was in my mailbox, a single sheet of paper typed, no signature. Leave it alone. Walk away. I stared at it, my pulse pounding. Leave what alone? Mike? The story? My lawn? Who the hell was doing this? The second letter came 2 days later, slid under my front door. This one was more specific. You don't know who you're dealing with. Stop now, or it gets worse. I took a photo, sent it to the cops, but I already knew what they'd say. We'll keep an eye on things. That was it. No urgency. No real concern. Just another case number in their system. I wasn't about to let this go. That night, I stayed up, watching the footage from my cameras over and over. I zoomed in on the figure who set the fire, analyzing their movements, their clothing, anything that stood out. Something about the way they moved felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Until I slowed the footage down. The way they hesitated for just a fraction of a second before lighting the match. The way their head tilted slightly, as if second-guessing. Jenny, Mike's wife. My stomach twisted. She had always seemed quiet, almost timid. The kind of person who went along with whatever her husband did, rolling her eyes at his antics, but never standing up to him. But now, watching her on that footage, I saw something different. Determination. Anger. A need for revenge that burned just as fiercely as the flames she had started. I wasn't dealing with one enemy, I was dealing with two. The next morning, I made my move. I printed out a still from the security footage, clear enough to recognize her. I slid it into an envelope and dropped it off at her doorstep with a single note. I know. That night, I heard her car leave. The next morning, the house was empty. Mike's house sat vacant for weeks, the for sale sign tilting slightly in the wind. No one wanted it. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened, and even the most oblivious buyers hesitated when they learned the history. Eventually, the sign disappeared, but no moving trucks ever came. The windows stayed dark. The driveway stayed empty. One afternoon, months later, I was mowing my new, fully restored lawn when I noticed something at the edge of the property line. A small, rectangular patch of dead grass. Perfectly shaped, perfectly deliberate. A message. I shut off the mower and stared at it. My heart pounded, but I didn't panic. I wasn't afraid. I just smiled. Because I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't over. The next few weeks were quiet. Almost too quiet. The for sale sign in front of Mike's house had been gone for over a month, yet no new neighbors had moved in. The windows remained dark, the driveway empty. The mailbox, once overflowing with junk mail, sat untouched. It was as if the house had been abandoned, left to rot like the patch of dead grass that still stained my property line. But I knew better. Jenny wasn't done. Every night, I found myself checking the security cameras, scanning for movement. Every morning, I inspected my yard, searching for any new sign that she had returned. And then, on the third week, I found it. A single white envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no address. Just my name, typed in bold letters. Inside was a note, short and to the point. You think you've won. You haven't. Walk away, Frank. My fingers tightened around the paper. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And it confirmed what I had suspected all along. Jenny hadn't left. She was still watching, still waiting, and she wasn't going to stop until she had the last word. That night, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of waiting for Jenny to make her move, I was going to force her hand. I turned off the cameras. I left my porch light off. I made it look like I had finally let my guard down. And then I waited. At exactly 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a motion alert, just a gut feeling. I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and peered out the window. A figure stood at the edge of my yard, barely visible in the dim light. My pulse quickened as I recognized the posture, the shape of her frame. Jenny. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at my house, as if she were waiting for something. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she turned and walked away. Not toward the street, not toward another house, but back toward the empty shell that used to be hers. That's when I realized the truth. She was still living there. The next day, I made a few calls, first to the real estate agency, then to the utility company. What I found out sent a chill down my spine. The house had been officially sold 2 weeks ago, but the new owners had never moved in. The water and electricity were still running, paid for by an anonymous account. And the security deposit? Signed under a fake name. Jenny had bought the house, or at least someone had bought it for her. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch, waiting, listening. And just before dawn, I heard it. A faint rustling near my back fence. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside, and froze. There, half hidden behind a bush, was a small, black duffel bag. I unzipped it carefully, half expecting some kind of trap. Inside were clothes, canned food, a flashlight, a burner phone, a survival kit. Jenny wasn't just squatting in her old house. She was living off the grid, hiding in plain sight. I had enough. The next morning I drove straight to the police station and demanded they take action. She's trespassing, I told them. She's been harassing me for months. She's living in a house that isn't even legally hers. The officer sighed. We'll look into it. No, I snapped. You'll do something about it. Now. An hour later, 2 officers knocked on Jenny's door. No answer. No movement. But the moment they stepped inside, I knew. The place was empty. No furniture, no belongings, just a stripped-down house and a back door left ajar. She was gone. For weeks, I waited for her to come back, but she never did. The house was resold, this time to a real family. The dead patch of grass slowly regrew. Life returned to normal. But sometimes late at night, I still checked the cameras, just in case. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some people don't forget. And Jenny? She wasn't the kind to forgive. Somewhere out there, she was still waiting, still watching. And one day, I knew she'd be back.